Okay, so we are going to get straight on, and I am going to, as I say, ask you. We've got 524 people on the live, which is amazing. So I'm going to ask you, grab your paper, grab your pen, and let's get started, everybody. Okay, if there are any issues, you can put them in the chat box, but bear in mind, I'm on my own with 550 of you nearly. So keep things as simple as possible. All right, so I'm not going to do big intros and things because if you want to know more about me, you can go on my website and find out. So you're here for a webinar, and with this, let's get started straight away. We are going to be looking, as you know, on about teaching shape to 3 to 5 year olds. And this is a free webinar. I would normally charge people for the quality of what you're going to get. I don't tend to put anything out that isn't good quality. I work really hard on what I do, and I know my stuff. I've worked in this environment and as early years and maths consultant, subject leader, teacher, local authority consultant for many, many years now. So this should really help move your practice forward. So I want you to treat this as if it was a paid session and you will get out what you put into it. So let's get started. Okay, now I've had to switch off my bit that shows me my chat box. So I'm just I might move in and out and check that, but let's say reduce how many screens I'm looking at here. Okay, so the session aims for this evening, keeping things really simple. My impact members and anybody who's done training with me before, you will hear me say the same things over and over again because they matter so much. And the first thing you'll hear me say a lot is destination matters most. It is not just in teaching maths. It is not just in teaching everything in your provision. Destination matters most in every part of life. If you are going to go on a walk for pleasure and you don't decide where your destination is, not only will you not know when you get there, but every step you take will not be in the right direction. So this is really, really important. Hello, everybody, saying people watching from Scotland and so forth. Thank you for joining us tonight. So second point is we need to find ways of discovering what we don't know that we don't know, or we didn't know we didn't know. So I want you to make sense of that statement. Again, if you've worked with me a lot, you'll know what that means. But if you don't do training, if you don't read books, if you don't constantly seek to challenge yourself, you won't know that you didn't know something. And one of the things that I embrace the most in my life is realizing that there's stuff that I've thought I knew all my life, and then someone says something and I think, oh my goodness, that makes so much sense, but I've never thought of it like that, or I didn't know that. So this is really important. It's also really important that you get that knowledge from a universally regarded reliable source, and that is so difficult because there are people who perhaps were perceived reliable sources, and it's always slightly subjective, but be very careful with your internet searches, for example. The next one, the third one then, is I want you to leave tonight with a whole new way of thinking. Now, everyone that I work with started somewhere else in their journey, just like I did. And some people on the live tonight, some people watching the recording, they will have come a really long way with me in the last couple of years, and of course helped by many other people in their lives as well. You might be at the beginning of your journey with me, and it isn't about who's ahead. That's something we talk about a lot in the Impact membership. It's about being on a journey with the right destination and the right mindset. So I want you to hold on to that. It's really, really important. But when you come on training, be prepared to change, because that's the point, isn't it? Whenever we learn something new, it's so we can change and not stay the same. So I'm going to be sharing one extra thing as well. I promised on the Facebook group, for those of you who are on this group regularly, that I'm going to share one big thing that makes the biggest difference to progress. And it's something that I was never doing in the past when I was a teacher, not for many, many, many years. And it's something that most of the practitioners that I work with weren't doing, but are now. So I can't wait to share that with you at the end. Okay, so our first activity is coming up, and some of you have done a little bit of this with me already. So just so I can connect with you here, I'm going to come back on camera and let's keep it really personal, okay? So the first thing, make sure you got your paper to hand, and some of you, as I say, have done a little bit of this already. But number one task, now you can do this, by the way, everybody, with your team to develop their knowledge in the way that I am. You can do it with parents. And I'm going to let you into a little secret here, because the activity that I'm going to do with you, I have adapted it and, dare I say, extended it a little bit, but I actually got it from this man here. And all of you will know that have done any training with me that subject knowledge is something I bang on about a lot. And Derek Haylock, show it again because people will go, show the book again, Maths Explained for Primary Teachers. It doesn't have to be an up-to-date one. Derek, I believe, is no longer with us, but I was lucky enough to go and see him speak, and he did this activity, and I've just taken it and changed it a little bit. So what I want you to do, everyone, is draw a triangle. Simple as that. First task. I'm going to have a little look in the chat box while you're drawing your triangle. Okay, so, and with all of these things, don't overthink it. Okay, overthinking things and being, I mean, I can't see what you're doing, but people are like, oh, what does Karen want? What does she want me to do that would, make her think that I was doing well? Fortunately, because I can't see you won't have as much of an agenda like that. But a lot of people who go into teaching, regardless of what kind of teacher you are, regardless of what kind of environment you work in, we often tend to be people who want to be approved of and told that we're doing well. So get rid of all that from your head and make sure you think your own thoughts. Okay, so I want you to look at the triangle you've drawn. Very often, just going to flip back again. Sorry, I have to just keep telling you what I'm doing here. Speaking my actions as I'm doing them. So very often when people draw a triangle, they will draw a triangle where the one of the sides of the triangle, shall we say, is parallel with the piece of paper they've drawn it on. So if I grab a piece of paper here, you will very often, now this, I'm not going to say this is a very good triangle, it's definitely not, but you get this idea here of this, and then people refer to this as the base and it's parallel to the paper. So pop in the chat box, why is that one of the most common, and it might be an equilateral triangle, usually it could be a right angled one that people draw, but that idea of there being a base is very, very common in people's drawings. So pop in the chat box, why is that? Because this is really important that we challenge the status quo of things. There was a little delay, so that means I can have a little sip of water. $724 people, everybody. So excited. Have a look at what other people are saying as well, because this is like a great cafe where we can all chat and you can actually see what everyone else is saying as well. So some people are saying it's the most commonly shared triangle. It's the one that we were shown at school. If you think about most images in textbooks, most images in books that are there to teach children, most posters, they show you this image. So what happens is you create in your mind what's called a concept image, which means the way when I think about this thing, my understanding creates images in my mind. And the most common image is that, and it's the reason, as you're saying in the chat box, it's the most important thing. Where did I get that image from? So another quick one that's not shape, but I talk to my members about a lot in training, is when you visualize a calendar and you think about the months of the year, many of us will think of like January at the top and December at the bottom, or January at one side and December at the other. What we don't think about is the way it really is, which it's cyclical, because December and January are next to each other. And the reason we don't is because of the images we've seen, the resources we've used. And it can be, it's not helpful to think about time like that. Time is cyclical. It's cyclical, but moving forwards as well. So I hope that's kind of good food for thought. Okay, so back to our presentation here. So now I would like you to describe the triangle that you have drawn and note down any words that you can use to describe that. It doesn't have to look pretty because no one's going to see what you've done. So again, don't overthink it. How would you describe your triangle? Just note down maybe 3 or 4 words. And thank you everyone who's continuing to contribute in the chat box. Okay, so you look at your triangle, you've got a few words written down. Okay, so second part of the activity, which some of you did with me on the Facebook group, was you're going to draw another triangle now, and it has to be completely different from the first triangle that you drew. Be aware of what your brain is doing. And if you want to, you can type in the chat box what's happening in your head now that you have to draw a second triangle, but it has to be completely different than the first. What should be happening is when you drew the first triangle, it was fairly easy. Now I've asked you to draw a triangle that's completely different. Your brain's had to go, and have a little bit more of a think about it. So you've kind of gone up in terms of your cognitive load here. Okay, so you're going to do exactly the same again, but we're varying it slightly this time. Not just describing what you've drawn, but describing what had to stay the same. Because what your brain has had to do here is say, I've got to make sure it's still a triangle. So what do I need to keep the same? But I've got to change it because Karen said make it completely different. So what can change? And note down some of the things there that you're noticing. So what had to stay the same and what could you change? And I want you to really hone in on starting to lead us to definitions here. Okay, now the third part, this should be super challenging, especially because we won't be able to compare it, but draw a third triangle and I want you to be convinced that it's not like anybody else's triangle that's on this call with us now. And there's a lot of us on. There's getting on for 800 people on the call. So change your triangle now and create one that you would be guaranteed that when you showed it, it was still definitely a triangle, but it wasn't like anyone else's. So this should make you be very creative, because when you draw something, you've got to think, well, someone else could draw that. So you're thinking even more about what can change to make it different to everyone else's, but what does it still have to have in order to be a triangle? So have a look in the chat box. What some people do at this stage is they might do a tiny, tiny little triangle in the corner of their page. So they've changed the position. They might have changed, so they've changed the size, and that's a good way of making it different to anyone else's. And likewise, someone might do an absolutely enormous triangle. But if you think about, your brain is saying, but it has to have this. It has to have this. So you can't change those things. But what can you change? So that's what we're beginning to think about here. So could you write in the chat box, what can you change? And it's still a triangle, but you're changing the way it appears. So some of you talked about it being upside down, so that's orientation. What else can you change, but still keep the triangle-ness about that shape that you're drawing? And be as specific as you can. So when we say size of what? Be more specific. So whatever you've written, Think, am I being specific enough? Can you be even more precise? Okay, so what should have happened here is the first activity is pretty easy. The second activity makes you think more, and the third activity should take you into a much more creative place. Okay, so let's have a look at the words that you have used to describe your triangle. So you could look at all three triangles now, and you could think about the words that you've used in your can change it, can't change it lists. And you're starting to really notice what it is that a triangle needs to have to be a triangle. So what that leads us to, and again, I'm just going to come off this, I'm going to come back on camera again to see you all, is what you have written is basically your definition of a triangle, the words that you've used. And that is your current destination for your teaching. And this is really, really important, because what we're going to go on to look at now is your maths subject knowledge is absolutely essential. And it is not about early years maths. You know, for years and years and years, I hid in the early years because I thought I couldn't learn maths well, and I thought I was rubbish at maths. Funnily enough, being a maths consultant that works all over the world, and pre-COVID, I was working right up to all of primary and into secondary, there's nothing wrong with my ability to learn maths. There was just loads wrong with the way I was taught maths at school, and I was taught to regard myself as a learner. So what I want us to think is that it's not about learning enough shape knowledge so that we can teach 2, 3, 4, 5-year-olds. And you think, oh, they're just doing, you know, the kind of easy stuff. That's what the rest of the world thinks. That's not true. Your knowledge needs to be the same shape knowledge as those that teach older children, because you are on exactly the same journey. And everything you teach will make a difference to how well those children learn now and in the future. It also, and all my impact members who are on tonight and will be watching this on catch up, they'll tell you this: when your subject knowledge grows, your confidence grows, your enjoyment of maths grows, your sparkle grows, your ability to stand up to people who maybe need to take you more seriously and respect you more grows. So this is really, really good stuff, everyone. Lots and lots of thumbs up there. All right, so let's move on then to have a look at this. So this is your current teaching destination. And we have to ask ourselves, is it the right destination? And how will you know? This is what having an open mindset is about. So everyone in my world, the reason I make my world such a safe place within my groups, within my training, is you need to be able to say, oh my goodness, I never ever thought of it like that. I've never done this like this before. We might even say, God, I feel so stupid, or I feel guilty because I didn't teach the children that. And you think, what I always say to people is, like, that's a natural reaction to have that reaction, but you didn't have the tool in your toolbox to do it any differently. So don't beat yourself up about it. Move on, and we'll give you the right tools. So let's have a look then at the next one as we move on. Have a look here then. Your teaching destination. Have a look at these statements here. What you believe is right, and we're looking at shape tonight, but what you believe is right about number, about measure, about space, about any aspect of mathematics, it will change and govern how you plan every single activity. It will change, it will govern how you judge whether an activity is good that you find on the internet or in a textbook or a scheme. We need to have the professional skill to say, this is good / effective, suitable or not. This is okay, but I need to adapt this. All activities on the internet and schemes are written by people. They're just people. And some of them know their stuff and some don't. And many, many schemes are written by multiple people. And we all only know what we know. Never have this sense that because something's a scheme or it's an initiative or training, including myself, Don't ever have that sense that everything they say must be right. Always have your professional hat on. Always be ready to critically appraise things. What you believe will change the questions you ask your children. You're going to ask the right questions when your subject knowledge and your pedagogical knowledge, pedagogy is how little brains learn maths, or anybody's brain learns maths, but it's understanding how the learning works. You are going to ask effective questions when you've got strong subject knowledge and pedagogical knowledge, and less effective questions, and questions that might shut children up when you haven't. How do we answer their questions? What are we drawing their attention to in the world that's going to help them learn about shape? If you have certain tools in your toolbox, you're going to draw their attention to things in a different way. And you're going to have the knowledge to support their questions and support their curiosity. This one is so powerful. When you have really good subject knowledge, which should be growing all the time, you can make connections with other areas of mathematics between shape and number and shape and size and shape and space. And that means there's less to teach. The more connections you make, the easier learning is, because you just think, oh, it's that same tool, I'm just using it in a different way. And also, of course, to the wider curriculum as well. And the most important thing is, when you know your stuff, apart from ending up far more confident, far more happy, far more sparkly about your job, far more respected, of course you are going to impact on their progress, both in the early years and the journey beyond that. So this is really, really important stuff. Does that sort of go into everybody? Are you feeling this sense that, you know, this is something you can hear how passionate I am about it? Does this make sense to you? Okay, so that is then leading us to this idea of you don't know what you don't know. And as I've said, it's not about early years maths. Learning about shape is about understanding shape, the trajectory that exists across all of primary years into secondary. It's all the same journey. It's so, so important. And I would say from experience that shape subject knowledge amongst practitioners in all year groups that I've worked in is generally very poor. And the funny thing is, again, I'm going to come off and have a, you know, have a look at you. I can't see you, but you can see me. But what I find really interesting, and I used to do this, was I used to split my week sometimes in when I was working in reception in year one, and we'd have like 3 days on number and 2 days on shape and that kind of thing. And some people even split it with like job roles. And whenever I saw shape coming up in my planning, I'd be like, oh, there's shape. And it just felt a bit easier. And it never occurred to me for years that my subject knowledge was basically wrong in many cases. And I was, you know, teaching this stuff really happily, being really relaxed about it. And it's one of the areas that I always deliberately use when I work with schools and work with practitioners, to reveal that there are big issues there. Because when we start thinking, oh my goodness, if there's big issues in my shape knowledge, I wonder if there's big issues with other knowledge as well. And then we can begin to learn, you know, learn new things together and not feel threatened by them. So hope that makes sense and people can relate to that as well. Okay, so my question to you then, we've drawn our triangles. You've thought about changing your triangles. You've thought about what it had to stay the same and what you could change. So what is the definition of a triangle? And if you've done this training with me before, or you in Impact and you've watched a webinar recently, maybe hold off putting anything in the chat box just for the moment. So pop your definitions, everyone, and remember this is about your learning. It's not about getting it right. So go for it. I will catch up on the chat box while I'm waiting for the delay and time for you to type. And it's okay not to know. It's just not okay to stay not knowing. Once you realize you don't know something that's part of your job, we go, right, it's okay not to know, but let's do something about it. So have a look at what's in the chat box. And if you think anything different, think, what did you used to think? What challenged your thinking? What changed your thinking? I'm just having a little look and see who's saying different things. So have a look through the, so we've got 3 sides, 3 points, 3 angles, 3 side shape with 3 vertices, a shape with 3 sides. Oh gosh, that went quick. Triangle has 3 points and 3 sides with 3 straight lines. 2D shape, 3 sides, 3 corners. So loads and loads of things that we can look through there. So do, as I say, do scoot backwards and forwards and have a look at the chat box, because it's a brilliant way to learn from other people as well. Okay, so let's have a look. What if I said to you that it doesn't have to include the word sides? I wonder what kind of face you might pull at that stage, or what might start to happen in your head. Maybe a little bit of that. There should be a kind of what? So think about how I've termed that as well. It doesn't need to include the word sides. It can do, and it might, depending on how precise we're being, but just tell me in the chat box what's happened in your head. Now I've suggested that the definition of a triangle doesn't need to include the word sides. And maybe if people, you know, I wonder how you'd spell this feeling here with the scribbly pens. I had lots and lots of different brains that I'd looked at to put in this image here. This is really important. This is called cognitive dissonance. I love that. I talk about cognitive things all the time, but cognitive dissonance is when someone that you trust says something and you go, what? And rather than be dismissive of it, which is what we do if we don't respect the person, perhaps, maybe we do that in our heads. But if we respect them and we think they've got more knowledge than we have, we kind of just go like, seriously, I don't really know what you mean. We're going to have to talk about this a bit more. And that is really good. It causes this wobble in your head. And then when you rebuild your knowledge, that's genuinely what learning is about. Learning can't happen until you cause that wobble first. If you never challenge what you think, your brain won't build new roots and new connections. So again, hope that makes sense, everybody. I think it's really exciting. Okay, here's some clues, everybody. So fill in the blanks. I'm going to move my chat box up a little bit here. Oh, goodness me. I'm going to see how many people we've got on now. It's a lot. Next time I go on the the bit where I can see myself, I'll see how many people we've got. But look here, what would you put? I don't know if you can see my cursor. I think you can. What would you put here? What does this word mean? And about this word here. So there is a big clue in the name, everybody, because we've got tri means 3. Angle means angle. Might need to do a little bit more work on this. So 3 angles. So some people got there a bit quicker than others. That's fine. So we need to know, and remember, it's not an angel, it's an angle. We need to know what an angle is, don't we? It's all very well saying that a triangle's got to have 3 angles. That's why how a triangle is defined. But what is an angle? So that's my next question to you people. Pop in the chat box. If it's got to have 3 angles, what is an angle? And if you don't know, or you don't completely know, just put something in the chat box, just like you would want to do if you were working with the children and they were, say, Key Stage 2, 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds, and you might say, what is an angle? You'd want them to come up with some ideas. So let's do exactly the same thing here. I know you're not teaching 7, 8, 9-year-olds, by the way. So we've got a measurement where 2 lines meet. Keep going. Angle is the amount of turn from one line to another. So I'm wondering, are we thinking, yep, I have that knowledge And I have a place that I would always check it because, of course, we have our off days or we're not quite sure. Or are we thinking, oh my goodness, I've never even thought about this? Oh, it's gone a bit quiet. Oh, here we go. Formed when two lines that are not parallel meet up, where two lines come together at a point, I think that is. Measurement of a space, lines meeting. So I wonder if, therefore, if that's what an angle is, did we mention this in our definition of a triangle? So let's just go back to here then. So an angle is a measure of the amount of turn or rotation between two straight lines from a fixed point. So you have to have two straight lines to create an angle, and they have a fixed point. So therefore that's why triangles have straight lines, because you can't have angles without straight lines, because it is the interaction of those. But if you think about it, often people will give definitions of triangles to do with just the number of sides, and they might not make that connection with the fact that it's about, they have to be straight. I've seen people, when I've done that activity that we started out with, do a triangle where they did like a wavy line and a wavy line and a wavy line, and they said, oh, you said make it look different. I was like, yeah, but it's still got to be a triangle. So what is it that makes a triangle a triangle? So let's have a look then. Do we need the children to know this? The age group that we are teaching, 3 to 5? No, of course not. So anybody who might be sitting there thinking, oh my goodness, she might be suggesting that we teach children how to define an angle. Nope, absolutely not. But does the adult teaching them, everybody in the team, need to understand that that is how we define a triangle, and that is what an angle is, because actually angles will occur with many of the shapes that children meet. And also there's so much to explore here, and it's going to lead us towards a really important point in this training. So if anybody's kind of thinking like, about those 2 points there, if I just go back there, do the children need to be able to say it? I mean, you might find children who are ready for that. I'd never underestimate. They know most of them know what a Tyrannosaurus Rex is, and there's nowhere in the curriculum that says teach them Latin and about animals that don't exist anymore. But it is about all this training tonight. Everything that I do is about making sure that your destination is correct. So you are thinking, this is where they're going with this. So this is the sorts of things we need to explore with them. Okay, does that make sense, everybody? As we move on, let's have a look. Yeah, so we measure, someone mentioned degrees. We measure that turn using a unit of measurement called degrees. Yeah, so, and of course that's confusing as well, but with older children, because we have degrees in temperature as well as degrees of measure, and they're completely different. Okay, so we're going to look at the how now here, and this is incredibly important. There is such a difference between memorizing and memory, and this is something where maths really gets such a bad rap for this. And I'm going to try and come off the screen, but it's not going to let me. Oh, hang on a second. Oh, there I am. Okay, so regardless of whether you're joining me and you're in your 20s or whether you're in your 60s or 70s or anything in between, the thing that many of us or all of us will have experienced a lot is that maths is taught as a subject based on memorization. So it's taught in a very abstract way, and it's, I'll tell you how to do something and you need to remember what I've said. And the people who can remember what I've said and do it preferably at speed and very accurately will be called good mathematicians, and everyone else will be called bad mathematicians. And that is memorizing. And we see this with things like learning times tables and so forth, where it's like, you've got to commit this to memory, to memory, but I'm going to separate these two out. Memorizing is being told something, whereas memory is having an experience that you remember. Okay, so I want us to really pull out the differences here. So an example I use is, if I was to tell you about a city in the world that I'd been to and you'd never been to, And I was good at describing it, and I was good at putting across that information, and you remembered pretty much everything I said. You could come across to someone else like you'd been to that place, but you hadn't. You wouldn't have a clue what it was like, but you were just able to say the right stuff. Whereas if I took you there, if I took all of you tonight to a city that you'd never been to, all to the same city, and we looked things up together and we traveled around and we asked questions and we interacted, it would really be down to the people who paid most attention, were most interested, asked the best questions, were, resourceful in the way that they found out about the place, who would get the most out of it. It wouldn't be like, you're genetically programmed to be a better tourist than someone else. It would be about how you engaged. And then when I said that place name, in the future, or we looked at photographs together, or we ate the same food or drank the same wine or whatever, and because your senses are really important here, all those memories would come back, and your knowledge of that place would be down to how much you paid attention, how much you interacted with it. So can you see that we are not after, in any learning situation, for someone to commit something to memory through memorization? Because there's no joy in that. You can't use memorization in a million different ways because you don't understand it. You can use it in the one way you've been given. Memory, because it is based on stuff you really did, you create a massive neural web of connections in your brain when you create memories, and therefore that can be manipulated and used in lots of different ways. And of course it's joyous as well, and that's what we're after. So think about what I've just said there about, you don't get high ability tourists. Okay, that should sound ridiculous. So let's think about the same thing here. Okay, so instead of telling you and you just recalling, sorry, I can see I've missed a few inverted commas out of things today, so you'd excuse my language skills. They're perfectly good. I've just done it and missed them. But it doesn't lead to understanding, okay? Whereas memory, think about your trip to that city. This would be the equivalent, okay? You experience it. You play around with it. You explore it. You notice things, you describe things, you experiment, you test, you explain, and you teach. So maybe on that trip to that city, someone else in the group says, oh, you went in that museum, didn't you? And I was thinking about going in that museum. What was it like? And you start explaining what it was, and you say, oh, we learned this, and we saw this, and it was fantastic. And because you tell that story, you not only get them to want to go and do it, but it actually reinforces that memory in your mind as well. Does that make sense? This is what great learning looks like, everyone. Not only in the early years, not only in maths, because basically this is you in that city. And if you don't hit the bars too soon, you're going to do your adult version of all of these things. And that's why we go back to places over and over again, isn't it? Because there's more we want to explore, and there's more we want to play around with, and there's more we want to experience. So when we give children this, it's what leads to learning. Okay, so think about that, the difference between memory and memorizing. That's what's happening in your head, not all over your brain, but you're building these neural connections, these neural motorways in your head when you experience things. That's why you feel tired. That's why you're absolutely pooped out, even if you haven't walked a long way. But you're taking in so much information. And that's why, like I said, when you smell those smells, when you eat that food in the future, your brain takes you back to this place. So, it makes so much sense. So this is how we need to teach shape. It's as simple as that. And it's how we need to teach all mathematics. So that's what I'm going to kind of take us on to for the final part of our session tonight. So I'm just going to come back on camera here. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do then is just get our hands, and this is kind of, it'd be easier if I was in person, but get your hands like this and put them as straight as you can. This isn't going to be mathematically not completely accurate, but it's about the concept. And you're going to then move one hand above the other. So we've got them like that. I hope you can see. It's my camera is focusing on me, so I need to move them back here. So you're going to hinge your hands here, We're not doing shadow puppets, everybody. Okay, that's for later. So you're going to hinge your hands there, and my hands are completely in line. And then you're going to move one hand away from the other like this. So I don't know if I can show you that in an easier way. So we've got them like this. And what you're doing is you're rotating your hand like this away from the other hand. You can keep one hand still because the angle of turn will be easier to measure if you keep one still. So what you're doing there is you are increasing the size of the angle because you're increasing the amount that you've rotated. So you can feel that, and then you can start thinking about wonderful things like, just pop in the chat box, there's 2 joints on your body that are really doing exactly, and there's more than 2, but 2 big ones. What joints can you name on the body that have a fixed point and one moves away from the other like that? Because there's a little bit of a top kind of little bit of knowledge I'm going to share with you now, a little bit of maths. Maths quiz knowledge. Hope you'll find it useful. But let's have a look in the chat box. Have a think about, because you can demonstrate this with the children, and of course it's good fun. Is anybody now bending lots of parts of their body and noticing this? I'll say there are more than one, but yeah, elbows and knees. Okay, so the elbow, there's the fixed joint. Depending on how flexible you are, you do this and you start off, and again, do it slowly. So you think, small angle, bigger, 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 bigger. Now, if you imagine, obviously the elbow and the knee are virtually the same thing, but with arms and legs. Now, mathematical terms, we saw triangle. Now, tri comes from Latin and angle comes from Latin, but maths pretty much comes from Latin and Greek. Okay, now the word gon, G-O-N, in Greek means knee, or meant knee in ancient Greek. It might not mean it in modern Greek. But when we talk about polygon, poly in Greek means many. So polygon, many angles, really originally meant many knees, because what the Greeks were doing was just literally looking at their bodies going, oh, it's a bit like a knee, so we'll just use that in maths. And maths, when you have these conversations, it stops being a scary subject, because maths always pretty much tells you exactly what it is, but you have to understand the etymology of the language in Greek and Latin, which I, again, think is really interesting. And most of us speak more Greek and Latin than you realize you do. We talk about centimeter and we talk about kilo. So cent coming from Latin, kilo coming from Greek, kilo 1,000, cent 100. Loads more I can tell you about that as well. So interesting fact, I hope, everybody. Okay, so we've done that with our hands. You could do exactly the same thing, therefore, with natural materials. So you could use things like sticks, and they could be found things. They do not have to be natural, but you find things that are as straight as possible. But the point here is not about the straightness. It's about playing around with this idea of creating the rotation. Can you imagine you've got a door that's closed and the children are peeping through the door and you're opening the door slowly? That is increasing the angle. So what you're doing is just, you can call them angles. The children, of course, don't have a problem with that at all, but you're playing around with this idea because it's so important to shape. So everybody is going like wrists, knuckles, octopus. You'll have to tell me a bit more about an octopus. So what I'm going to share with you here then is these are Karenisms here. I've not heard anybody else talk like this, but my impact members are used to me talking about this. We talk about concrete, pictorial, abstract. And when you use your hands and when you use natural and found materials, I'm going to say you're exploring angles using what we would call concrete real world. Concrete meaning it's a real thing. You can move it and touch it, but it's a real world. And I'm going to show you in a moment an example of concrete maths world. So see if this makes sense to you. So if I show you, I've got some resources here again. So let's have a look. So concrete maths world is where, my definition of this is where we use maths equipment. So I've got some things here, and honestly, if you're as old as me, this would have been seen as a great toy when we were younger, this sort of thing. So this has got a split pin in it, And of course, you don't have to have plastic ones. You literally can get a strip of card and you punch a hole in it, and you just basically, the split pins are the thing to spend the money on, and you can get thousands for very little money. But of course, here is, instead of using sticks, which of course you're going to explore those angles, but it won't be as mathematically as correct, you can then play around with this idea. So keep this one still and we move this one further apart. And of course, it starts to remind us of a clock. And a clock is a great example, of course, of angles at work. And when we think about, like we said, about a knee, so that could be a leg, and there's the knee, you know, moving. So you've got an idea there, and you think about, okay, what can we change? What can we stay? What stays the same? So we could have different sized bits. You know, can you still do angles when the straight lines are different lengths? Because we can compare those. Can we do shorter ones? Is it still angles when we do long things? Is it still angles when we do short things? Okay, so that whole idea about, you know, making them smaller and making them larger, again, that rotation. So this is really important for us, to our staff, to have the understanding of why we're doing it. This is about this destination. It's not, oh, in our setting, we're now going to use these plastic bits like this. There's no point to that. And yeah, it might be fun, but you're not taking your team and your children on a destination because their math subject knowledge isn't strong enough yet. So does that make sense, everyone? Let's have a look then at the next bit. So pictorial, I was wondering about this, and these are sorts of things that I can do a lot more with you on another time. And it's something that I've done a lot of maths projects with schools on, as well as my own children when I was teaching. But when you start to understand this rotation of turn and you start playing around creating triangles, so if I show you my plastic again, the idea here that if I did try and get these in focus, if I've got that one there and I start to do that, and then I could find a strip that fitted there, but if the angle was smaller, I'm going to need a smaller strip there. And if I did like this, of course, I'm going to need a much bigger strip. And of course, it doesn't matter which way around we do them, but you do this, and again, you could get a third piece, and you can think about where you put them again, size, and you can rotate it so that you get away from that idea about triangles having to have bases, because they don't. A triangle can have a base if you orientate it, but it doesn't need to have one. So we can do things like finding images in art, creating lines that are at, you know, that have smaller and greater distances and angles with them, so that you can think about them intersecting. So you could think about, you could have, oh, you know, chalk lines on a piece of, let me just come off on this so you can see where I'm flapping my arms around here. You can do like long chalk lines on the table or on your tuff tray, and what will happen is those lines will intersect and they will create lots and lots of triangles, and your children can actually use, of course, what we've got, things like that, and actually look at how big the angles are and exploring that. But you're playing, you're not trying to, at the age groups we work at, get them to define triangles as having angles. You just get them to experience this stuff so they're paying attention to it. And of course, it's really so much more fun and so much more important for us as well. You can look at things that, lots of you did this on the group, that you get things like a Dorito, and you can talk about what reminds us of triangles, but they aren't triangles, and why. So this is a really, really nice one. I've done loads with young children. You go, that reminds me of a triangle, but it's not a triangle because it needs this. It's a bit like those storybooks that say, you know, things like, you know, the "you're not my mummy" and that kind of thing, where somebody's looking for something and you're like, you're not my triangle because you would need to have this, because there's things about it that remind us. So much potential there. I think that we've got pictorial real world and pictorial maths world here. Pictorial real world for me would be naturally occurring triangles in art. And then when we start to create them using much lower cognitive load to do with lines and so forth, and it's not in the context of art or nature, we've taken it into maths world. So again, I hope that makes sense to everyone. But it's your subject knowledge underpinning this that matters the most. So if we return then to our session aims, and I'm going to just throw this over to you to reflect, Your destination matters most. What you believe in the case of this evening, a triangle is what you will lean your teaching towards. And what we have to be incredibly careful with is that recognizing shapes on a piece of paper as an image and saying that's a triangle is not what defines a triangle. And that's what a lot of us were brought up with. It's the properties that define a triangle. The orientation doesn't matter. The size doesn't matter. The length of the sides doesn't matter. The size of the angles, does it matter or doesn't it matter? Again, you can think about that. It depends on the triangle. So what I hope today has given you is a chance not only to really safely challenge what you didn't know about shape, but are you finding that your brain's saying, do you know what? I want to find out what else I don't know. Rather than feeling threatened or stupid, I'm thinking, whoa, this is amazing. I don't want my children to not have the best start. I don't want them to not be on a trajectory for success. So you investing in yourself is what's going to make that happen. You're going to, we can undo some of the things that happen to us. And therefore, you'll have a whole new way of thinking. I want you to be excited by what we've looked at tonight. So I'm going to show you the one thing then. I've kind of alluded to it already, but I'm going to have a look in the chat box. So, so how would you start teaching the triangle? I would do what I've done tonight. So first of all, I would start with your subject knowledge, but with the children, you need to do what I'm going to tell you next, but also you need to go down the route of exploring properties first and then spotting it, very much like I said towards the end. So there's lots more we can do together. See this evening as being about investing in you. So I don't think that question came up earlier. I was expecting that question a lot when people feel like, yeah, but what do I do with the children? Yeah, but how do I teach the children? And that's a little bit like, if you want to prepare for a massive hike through the Alps and someone keeps saying, but are we going to start tomorrow? And you go, hang on a minute, we need to work out all the safety equipment first and how it all works. Yeah, but are we going to start tomorrow? And then you say, no, but we need to work out how to get fit enough to do this. So can you see that we have been encouraged to be that kind of way of, let's just get started. Let's get started. Like, no, we have got to be in the best position. So I'm going to give you one more little tip here, and it will transform, honestly. With everything we've said, it will transform your teaching. So the one thing, and as I say, I have alluded to this, and there's lots more training we could do together, is that shapes are defined by their properties. I don't want you to even think about 2D and 3D. For two reasons. One, because that's not how children think about them. And two, because most adults' definition of 2D and 3D is completely wrong anyway. So let's make sure we get all of that right before we start discussing whether it's important or not. But we need children to experience shapes as having properties. And then what happens is we start categorizing them according to those properties. That's how it works. So it's not, as you can see at the bottom, about labeling a particular image. Pretty much every book, pretty much every scheme, pretty much everything I did probably the first 10 years of my life as a teacher was holding up images and getting children to bark names at them. They may as well have called them Sam and, I don't know, Isaac. And they're not names, they are categories. And that's why when you have discussions with adults about a square and an oblong being a rectangle, and the adult says, well, we used to call them oblongs, but that's an old-fashioned word. We call them rectangles now. That gives away the fact the adult doesn't know what a rectangle is, and also gives away the fact that the adult thinks that labeling something is what we're after. And it's not labeling it. It is understanding the properties and categorizing it. That's the destination. So I hope, everybody, that has been helpful. I'm going to show you. Subject knowledge is really, really important, as I've said all evening, but it's like, where do you get it from? How reliable is it? So there are my pages of me checking things. This is about an angle. This was literally today. I do this for a job and I check my knowledge all the time. And these are the 2 books that I was using. I still don't just rely on 2 books. I'm constantly thinking about it, but I make sure that the people I go to are universally recognized for their knowledge, because it's a bit like reading history. You know, you'll read one thing one place and one thing another place, and you think, which one is right? And it can be really frustrating. So we just have to head for the ones that more people are happy to agree with, and people as well who we would trust in terms of mathematical knowledge and teaching. Okay, so what I want to finish with, everyone, I'm just going to come back on and show my face on screen. So has that, before I show you this last little thing, has that given you food for thought? Are you willing to be someone who says, I know I've got to teach the children and that's what I keep focusing on, but actually I've got to improve myself first? Okay, it will change everything you do with the children. You're going to slow down. You're going to think about this. It's, again, one of the things that I often think about and talk about in training is you can buy all the cookbooks in the world, as in recipe books. But if you want to be a better cook, no recipe book makes you a better cook. The way you become a better cook is by being around people who can cook better than you and looking at what they're doing and asking them to explain it and copying what they do. When we take on math schemes and when we find activities online and so forth, that's like buying recipe books. You've got to know your stuff. You've got to be a better cook before you can really, know whether that recipe is going to work or not. Okay, so brilliant. Yeah, Derek Haylock, here he is. There are 1,000,001 of these for sale, everybody, on eBay and on Amazon and everything, because students buy them for their texts at university, and because they're not inspired at university, and because someone doesn't help them realize that the time you're really going to need this is when you're teaching, not just when you're training, they leave them in their parents' garages. The parents go mad and sell them, either without asking them or they sell them themselves. And then they come into my world and go, oh, I had that and I think I sold it, or it's in a box at my mum's. Well, get it back or go online and find one for £3. All right, but don't not have the right knowledge. It's really important. So I want to finish by showing you, okay, this has been a bit of an issue. I'll just say briefly that virtually everybody that said they didn't get the emails did get them, but they took a while to find them. But that you might be missing out if you have already signed up for something with me in the past and you already have a library so you can log in. One thing I would suggest to all of you is go and click. You have to log in first and you get your little avatar. Click on settings and then go and make sure that all of these boxes are ticked, because legally, when you signed up, if you don't tick the box that says I can send you emails, then the Kajabi that I use for my website, it won't send you an email. Now, that shouldn't have happened with this because you signed up to the event. So that gets around the GDPR because you've asked for the information. But when I send you out things regularly, only the people who've ticked these will get them, because that's what we call GDPR. So for anybody not in the UK, that's our data protection system. So what I'm going to do, everybody, also, look, I may as well show you this one. Look, thank you. There's my thank you slide. You'll be getting an email. In fact, it might have landed in your inbox now because it's an hour after the event, and an hour after the event is now. So I have got something that I'm only going to share with those of you who booked on this call, certainly to begin with. So it's heading over to your email box now, and it is a special thing that might suit you or might not suit you, might be where you're at with your thinking, might not be. If you're an Impact member, you do not need to buy this. This is included in your membership and it's already in your library. Okay, so please, please, please don't pay for it. But for anybody else, go and have a look at what I've sent you, because it is mega. Okay, it is also on the website. So in fact, I wonder if I can pull it up and show you, because you could scoot over this way if you don't get the email. Okay, there's my website there. And I was working hard on this before I came on. at the top here, it will say Number Sense Training. And on a drop-down menu, there is something new on there called Foundation Number Sense, which is what the email will be about. But there is a very special offer, and it is only for the next 7 days. So I will tell you a bit more about it, but do watch out for that. Okay, otherwise, I am going to hop off now because, like many of you who may not have had your dinner yet, I haven't had my dinner yet, so I'm going to go and have that. But I hope you found it really useful, and I've got so many other things queuing up in the pipeline for you. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining me. And as I promised, you will get a link to the recording as well. So if you had to miss a little bit or you didn't see any of it, you will get to go back and watch it. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care and see you soon.